2 Chronicles 13, 1 through 20 gives us a victorious story about a war against a corrupt king. In the 18th year of the rule of King Jeroboam, Abiah took over the throne of Judah. He ruled in Jerusalem 3 years. His mother was Mecca, daughter of Uriah of Gibeah. War broke out between Abiah and Jeroboam. Abiah started out with 400,000 of his best soldiers. Jeroboam countered with 800,000 of his best. Now we're talking about strategic, tactical warfare. Warfare. Okay. Abiah took a prominent position on Mount Zermaraim in the hill country of Ephraim and gave this speech. This is the beginning with the 4th verse. Listen, Jeroboam and all Israel, don't you realize that God, the one and only God of Israel, established David, his sons, as the permanent rulers of Israel, ratified by a covenant of salt. God's kingdom ruled by God's kings. And what happened? Jeroboam, the son of Shlomo, or Solomon you would call him, Shlomo's slave, Nebat, rebelled against his master. All the riffraff joined his cause and were too much for Rehoboam, Solomon's true heir. Rehoboam didn't know his way around. Besides, he was a real wimp. He couldn't stand up against them. Now I'm reading from a Message Bible because I like the language. Verse 9, taking advantage of that weakness, you are asserting yourself against the very rule of God that is delegated to David's descendants. You think you're so big with your huge army backed up by our golden calf idols that Jeroboam made you as gods. But just look at what you've done. You threw out the priests of God, the sons of Aaron, and the Levites, and made priests to suit yourselves. Priests just like the pagans have, that appear on broadcasting networks from coast to coast. Anyone who shows up with enough money to pay for it can be a priest. It's the same today. Anybody that's got enough money to pay for it is an apostle. I was an apostle. And we're the only institution that will take you at your word and sit you on the front row because you say you're an apostle. We don't make you make full proof of your ministry. And on top of that, we subjugate. False apostles always subjugate you to themselves. They have you under lock and key. You can't go any place without them. You can't say anything without them. You can't even dispense your ministry unless they give you permission to dispense it, as though you weren't called by God but by them, because you were if you're following them. They put your sons to usury, and they call wars that should not be fought, that they know they cannot win. That's what this man did. He was a young man, didn't have the sense of a fly in his head. But you just look at what you've done. You threw out the priest of God, and then anybody that could pay could become a priest. And a priest of no God at all. They didn't even adopt the God of the Hebrews. A priest of no God at all. Verse 11, but the rest of us in Judah, we're sticking with God. We have not traded him in for the latest model. We're keeping the tried and true priest of Aaron to lead us to God, and the Levites to lead us in worship by sacrificing whole burnt offerings and aromatic incense to God at the daily morning and evening prayers, setting our fresh holy bread on a clean table, and lighting the lamps on the golden lampstand every night. We continue doing what God told us in every way that we were told to do. But you have rid yourselves of him. Now, how you do that, I don't know. Can't you see the obvious? God is on our side, so he's our leader. And his priest will trumpet, all ready to blow the signal to battle. Oh, Israel, don't fight against God, the God of your ancestors. You will not win this battle. I say to you, do not fight against liberty. You will not win this battle. This is that time. And everybody that's called to be on the front line as a general of this war has been in obscurity for a season. We don't need that visibility. We don't need to be celebrated on Christian television all the time. Television in the future will become a means to an end. But right now, it's full of a lot of junk and stuff. But God is about to blow on it because there's a wealth transference. The largest wealth transference in the history of the body of Christ is about to happen. And I know this. This isn't something I'm thinking about. I've already talked to people who are in the process right now as I am speaking of transferring it. This is the truth before God. The truth before God. Trillions, not billions, not millions, is flowing even as I speak. It's all in a matter of settling over days, hours, minutes, and seconds. And some of you look at me like, oh my God, can I really believe this? Yeah, you believe it. I asked that same question. I said to God, I said, how is it that I know this and I'm a part of this? I don't have a business background or anything. And he said, because of who I made you to be and because of the changes I took you through. You see, if you've never been stripped of everything, you lose it all. Until you lose it all, you'll never learn the value of what you already had. You'll never know the value of how good he is until you lose it all. And you don't care anymore. You only care about him and him crucified. That's all I live and breathe for is him and him crucified. I get to still have my children. I get to still have friends. I get to still have a ministry. But he alone is all I live for. He's my next breath. He's my next beat of my heart. He's my sanity. He's my everything. And in him is locked everything. Oh, Jesus, I love you today. Verse 12, can't you see the obvious? God is on our side. Verse 18, when Abiah was speaking, Jeroboam had sent men around to take them by surprise by the rear. Jeroboam in the front of Judah, and the ambush began behind. Then Judah looked back. They saw that they were attacked front and back. They prayed desperately to God. The priests blew their trumpets, and the soldiers of Judah shouted their battle cry. At the battle cry, God routed Jeroboam and all Israel before Abiah and Judah. The army of Israel scattered before Judah. God gave them the victory. Abiah and his troops slaughtered them. 500,000 of Israel's best fighters were killed that day. The army of Israel fell flat on its face, a humiliating defeat. The army of Judah won hands down because they trusted God, the God of their ancestors. Abiah followed up his victory by pursuing Jeroboam, taking the towns of Bethel, which means house of God, Yeshanah, and Ephron with their surrounding villages. Jeroboam never did recover from his defeat with Abiah while Abiah lived. Later on, God struck him down and he died. Meanwhile, Abiah flourished. He married 14 wives and ended up with a family of 22 sons and 16 daughters. Okay. That was a potent man or a crazy man, whichever comes first. Okay. So, I agree with you, Apostle, a little bit of both. Okay. So this is a good example of how heaven, when heaven backs you up, you can't lose. Heaven backs you up, you can't lose. They had to do warfare with those who should have been with them. That's what I wanted you to see. Israel divided under Jeroboam. We have churches that divide under people who are masters who subject people. We have churches that are being pillaged and people who are being raped and hemorrhaging in the body of Christ. That's why the wealth transfer has to take place, because God has to bind up the brokenhearted and the wounds. Money is the answer to it, and you'll see that in a minute.